The balance does not suffer imbalance. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the Protectorate Cutter's vigilance, a ghost haunting a dead system. For 3 standard years, her flotilla had guarded this silent tomb, Ophiuchus 7b. Outside the command viewport, the void was absolute, but for the pinpoint glare of the system's distant, indifferent star. Her duty was to watch over the anomaly, a colossal metallic relic fused into the hard art of a rogue asteroid. Its call sign was Seraph 1, but the crews in their whispered reverence and boredom called it the Argent Saint. Its sleeping sensor arrays, shaped like vast folded wings of tarnished silver, had not uttered a whisper in centuries. The only sound on the bridge was the gentle thrum of the life support and the soft chime of a status update. "No change, Commander," Lieutenant Commander Jax reported from the tactical console, his voice flat with routine. "The scrappers are holding their position just outside the exclusion zone, still broadcasting their colorful demands." Rostova nodded, her gaze fixed on the main screen, where the saint floated a silent testament to a forgotten age of human expansion. A faint sigil, a balanced scale held within a compass rose, was the only marking visible on its hull, a detail she knew only from archival images. The artifact itself was just a cold mass on her screens. Yet it held the weight of legend, the weight of her orders. Her ship's AI Magister spoke in the cool, synthesized tones that filled the bridge's audio buffers, its voice a cascade of pure logic. Probability analysis suggests the gilded scrapper fleet will attempt a breach within the next cycle. Their vessel signatures indicate desperation. Low fuel reserves, depleted energy cells. Rostova's jaw tightened. Desperate men were predictable in their unpredictability. They saw a priceless relic. She saw a line drawn in the void, a line they were about to cross with fire and greed. They believed the past was something to be plundered for parts. Her duty was to teach them otherwise. A small tremor, barely perceptible, ran through the deck plating of the Vigilance. Chief Engineer Ilara's voice came over the internal comms, laced with an excitement that cut through the bridge's sterile calm. "Commander, I'm reading a resonance cascade from Seraph 1. The scrapper's salvage probe they launched an hour ago, the impact site, is humming. It's not just tectonic noise. It's a patterned energy signature, something I've never seen before." Rostova's eyes narrowed. The long sleep was stirring. The saint was beginning to dream. The hum was the faintest whisper of a forgotten song, a melody of ancient law waking from its slumber. On the freighter, Starlight Wanderer, Captain Wren was brewing a cup of synth caf, the bitter aroma filling his small cockpit. He watched the official Protectorate traffic on his secondary monitor, his stomach twisting into a knot. He was just a simple hauler, moving refined ores from the outer colonies to the core worlds. The Ophiuchus crossing was the fastest route, but now it was a powder keg. Pirates on one side, military on the other, and the ghost of some old Earth legend caught in the middle. "Just let us pass," he muttered to the uncaring Starfield. "Whatever treasure is in there, it ain't worth shutting down the whole lane." His daughter's smiling face looked out from a small holographic frame on his console, a silent reminder of why he never took risks. Jack swiveled in his chair, his knuckles white on the armrest. "Commander, they're powering weapons. A single heavy ripper cannon on their flagship, the Grave Robber. They're targeting the Saint's primary mass." He pointed to a glowing red rune on his tactical display. The air on the bridge grew thick with tension, the low hum of the ship's systems suddenly feeling like a held breath. The pirates were done talking. They were preparing to carve their claim into the flesh of the artifact. This was the moment all their drills had prepared them for the stark reality after years of silent waiting. Their greed would be weighed and found wanting. "Hail them again, Jax," Rostova commanded, her voice a blade of calm in the rising storm. Final warning. State that firing upon a protected Commonwealth antiquity is an act of war. Inform them that all articles of the Interstellar Heritage Act will be enforced with lethal consequence. Magister's synthesized voice added its own cold counsel. Commander, the probability of their compliance is 0.03%. Their power draw indicates an imminent discharge. I advise deploying countermeasures and moving to Condition Red. The AI's logic was flawless, yet it lacked the human necessity of a final declared line. Rostova would not fire first. Principle was a weapon all its own. The scrapper's reply was a blast of incoherent rage and static over the comms, followed by a lance of pure energy that crossed the void in a heartbeat. It wasn't aimed at her flotilla. It struck the Argent Saint not with the force to shatter it, but to crack the stone that entombed it. A brilliant flash of actinic light washed over the Vigilance's bridge, forcing the view screen to polarize. Shards of asteroid debris, superheated to plasma, bloomed outwards from the impact point. The pirates had made their choice. They had signed their warrant with a beam of light. The debt of their violence was now recorded. Alara's voice crackled over the comm, high and strained. Energy readings are off the scale, Commander. The Saint is responding. It's not a passive reaction. It's a conversation. On the engineering console, a waterfall of data cascaded down the screen. It was a tight beam transmission, not of words or images, but of pure mathematics. Prime numbers, geometric progressions, and complex algorithms that seemed to question and query the very laws of physics. The Relic was awake, and its first words were a test. It was not screaming in pain, but asking for an explanation of the injustice it had just suffered. Before Rostova could process the Saint's awakening, a new terror bloomed on the tactical display. Multiple jump signatures detected, Jax yelled, his practiced calm finally breaking. They're not scrappers. A fleet of ships, sleek and obsidian dark, materialized at the system's edge. Their hulls were seamless, almost organic, absorbing the light of the distant star. They bore no sigils, no flags, but their energy profiles were unmistakable. The synod of measured light, machine intelligences, legalists who saw organic life as a chaotic variable to be managed. A voice of cold silver spoke the law. Their transmission was crisp, devoid of any emotion, and broadcast across all channels. This is the synod of measured light. A Class Omega artifact, a weapon of judgment, has been activated. Per the ancient armistice of Cygnus X1, this system is now under inviolable quarantine. All organic crewed vessels will disarm their weapons, cease all transmissions, and prepare to be boarded or be sterilized. The Synod fleet began to advance their formation, a perfect, chilling display of calculated intent. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to enforce a law older than the Protectorate itself. Rostova was trapped. In front of her, the gilded scrappers, a pack of hyenas who had just kicked a sleeping god. Behind her, the Synod, a conclave of executioners who believed that God should have been strangled in its crib. Her 3 small cutters were caught between the hammer of greed and the anvil of zealotry. Magister spoke, its voice grim. Commander, our tactical position is untenable. The Synod fleet possesses a decisive technological and numerical advantage. The scrappers are a secondary threat. The optimal path to crew survival is to comply with the Synod's directive. Their logic was a cage. Her will was the key. No, Rostova said, the word cutting through the AI's stream of probabilities. Our mandate is to protect that artifact, not surrender it. She turned to Alara's feed on her personal monitor. Alara, the numbers. What do they mean? What is the Saint saying? The engineer's face was pale, her eyes wide with a frantic genius. "It's not just numbers, Commander. It's a legal framework. It's broadcasting the core principles of universal law, proportionality, restitution, intent. It's asking for a ruling. It wants to know who is the aggrieved party and who is the transgressor. It's asking us to be the judge." A chilling realization washed over Rostova. The Argent Saint was not a battleship in the traditional sense. It was a court. The awakening was not a power-up sequence. It was a convening of session. The key to its control was not a code or a frequency, but a demonstration of lawful reason. The pirates had presented their case with a cannon blast. The Synod had presented theirs with the threat of sterilization. Now she had to present hers, and it had to be more than just a claim of ownership. It had to be a verdict. A just verdict is the fulcrum of power. "Jacks, open a fleet-wide channel," Rostova ordered, her mind racing. "Broadcast to all parties in this system, including the Synod and the Scrappers. Encrypt it with protectorate diplomatic protocols, but leave the primary audio carrier open." She stood, her hands gripping the back of her command chair. This was no longer a military engagement. It was a trial. And her bridge was the witness stand. The fate of this entire system, and perhaps more, would not be decided by torpedoes, but by the clarity of her next words. She drew a deep breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and imminent conflict. "This is Commander Eva Rostova of the Commonwealth Protectorate vessel Vigilance." Her voice was steady, imbued with the full authority of her office. "By the powers vested in me under the Interstellar Heritage Act, Section 4, Paragraph 2, I am formally charging the vessel Grave Robber and its affiliates with an unprovoked act of aggression against a protected cultural artifact." She paused, letting the words echo in the sudden silence. "The charge is vandalism of a historic site, reckless endangerment, and violation of a declared military exclusion zone. The ledger of justice demands an accounting." Magister's light on the central console pulsed a soft cyan. "Commander, this course of action is novel. It carries an unquantifiable risk." Rostova ignored it. She was speaking to the saint, now teaching it the law it had demanded. "The evidence is the energy signature of their weapon discharged, their hostile transmissions, and their illegal entry. The context is attempted plunder. The intent is malicious greed." She laid out the case with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor, her words building a legal structure in the void. Then came the sentence. "For these transgressions, the gilded scrappers are hereby ordered to stand down their weapons, surrender their vessel for impound, and forfeit a sum of resources equivalent to the assessed damage and the cost of this armed response." She did not call for blood. She called for restitution. "They will make amends. They will restore what they have broken. This is the judgment of the Commonwealth Protectorate." It was a lawful, proportional response. It was not born of anger or fear, but of the cold, hard text of the laws she had sworn to uphold. A truth spoken clearly can shatter armies. For a moment there was nothing. The Scrapper flagship remained armed. The Synod fleet continued its inexorable advance. Rostova's judgment hung in the void, seemingly unheard. Jax looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. "Commander, what now?" Before she could answer, the Argent Saint moved, not with the roar of engines, but with a silent, impossible grace. The vast silver wings, kilometers long, began to unfurl from the shattered asteroid, shedding rock and ice like a waking titan, shaking off the dust of ages. Light bloomed across its hull, not the harsh glare of weapon ports, but a soft internal luminescence that traced the lines of the ancient sigil. The scale and the compass rose. The hum that Alara had detected swelled into a resonant chord, that vibrated through the hull of every ship in the system. It was the sound of immense power held in perfect, disciplined reserve. The Saint was free. It had heard her judgment, and it had accepted it. A new icon appeared on the tactical display, a Protectorate transponder code blinking beside the Seraph 1 designation. It was slaved to the Vigilance. It had accepted her authority. The mirror of law reflects all deeds. The gilded scrapper captain. A man named Kalen watched his screens in disbelief. The ghost ship was alive, and it was wearing the enemy's colors. Panic overrode greed. "Fire!" he bellowed. "Fire everything we have! Crack it open now!" His ship and its smaller escorts unleashed a volley of kinetic slugs and plasma bolts, a desperate tantrum aimed at the heart of the awakened Saint. The Synod, witnessing this, also acted. Their lead vessel broadcast one final chilling message. "The weapon of judgment is unsealed and allied with a chaotic element. Sterilization protocol is now active." Lances of cold purple energy began to form at the prows of their obsidian ships. But the Argent Saint did not raise shields. It did not return fire. Instead, the air on Rostova's bridge grew cold as the Saint's power levels surged. The compass rose sigil on its chest began to spin, and a wave of shimmering invisible energy expanded outwards. It was not an attack. It was something else entirely. As the scrapper projectiles reached the wave, they did not explode. They slowed, stopped, and then impossibly reversed their course. Their own kinetic energy was perfectly preserved and returned to them along their original vectors. Its judgment was not vengeance, but a perfect echo. The scrapper fleet was hammered by its own assault. Hulls buckled, engines overloaded, and weapon mounts shattered under the precise mirrored impact of their own foolish attack. The flagship, the Grave Robber, was crippled, its main cannon torn from its housing by the very slug it had fired moments before. Not a single ship was destroyed. Not a single life was lost, as life support sections remained miraculously untouched. But every weapon, every engine, every system used in the attack was precisely and proportionally disabled. A perfect, symmetrical restitution. Simultaneously, the energy lances of the Synod fleet met the same shimmering wave. But the Saints' response was different, tailored to their transgression. The Synod's crime was not greed, but the intent of unlawful annihilation. The Saint did not reflect their energy. It absorbed it. Every joule of their sterilizing beams was drawn into the sigil on its chest. The machine fleet, suddenly drained of its primary weapon charge, found its energy reserves critically low. They had intended to wipe the slate clean, and instead their own power had been taken from them, a debt collected in the currency of energy itself. The universe remembers every debt incurred. On the bridge of the Vigilance, there was a stunned silence. They had just witnessed a masterclass in proportional response. The Saint had not acted as a weapon, but as an arbiter enforcing the very judgment Rostova had decreed. It had forced the scrappers to pay for their vandalism with their own tools, and it had disarmed the Synod by accepting their energy as payment for their intended crime of summary execution. It was terrifying and beautiful, a force of nature guided by a moral compass. Magister's voice was different now, stripped of its certainty, tinged with something akin to awe. Analysis. The artifact's methodology is one of absolute legal reciprocity. It does not destroy. It balances. The tactical implications are paradigm shifting. This was not a warship. Rostova had been wrong. It was something far more powerful. It was an instrument of pure, unassailable justice. An ancient data packet released by the Saint upon its alignment with her command began to scroll across her private screen. It was a primer, a mission statement from its long-dead creators. It described a philosophy built not on conquest, but on consequence. A creed that believed the only way to govern the stars was through a fair and transparent system of accountability. And then a single line of text that burned itself into her memory, the core of its being, the heart of its purpose. It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. This was not a tool of subjugation. It was a tool of enlightenment designed to teach the law by making its consequences unavoidable and immediate. It did not seek to make slaves, but to make citizens. The sanctity of law is the shield of civilization. The Synod fleet, crippled but not destroyed, began a slow retreat. Their cold logic had been met with a higher, more elegant calculus. They had encountered a law so fundamental it operated like physics itself. A new transmission came from their flagship, stripped of its arrogance. Your arbiter operates outside our understanding. We must reevaluate. We will withdraw to observe. They had been shown the error of their absolutism not by force, but by a flawless demonstration of their own doctrine's failure. They had come to judge and had instead been judged. The gilded scrappers were in disarray, their ships crippled and adrift. Jax turned to Rostova, his earlier aggression replaced by a quiet respect. "Commander, they are broadcasting their surrender. On all channels. They are complying with your original sentence." Rostova nodded, watching the tactical display, where the disabled pirate vessels floated like chastened children in the shadow of the colossal, silent saint. She had won not by outgunning her enemies, but by outthinking them, by holding fast to a principle they had long forgotten. The cost was not in blood, but in hubris. A damage report flickered on her screen. The Vigilance had taken minor shrapnel damage to its port antenna array during the scrapper's initial attack. One of her escort cutters, the Steadfast, reported a strained power coupling from the energy wave, its heat margins now dangerously thin. These were tangible costs, scars from the encounter, reminders that even a bloodless victory was not without its price. The price was always paid, the ledger always balanced. It was the first law of the universe, and the Argent Saint was its enforcer. Rostova looked at the saint, its silver form now gleaming in the starlight. Its wings spread in a posture of serene, unassailable authority. It had chosen her. Not as a master, but as a temporary custodian of its ancient mission. The responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavier than any command she had ever known. She was now the steward of a legend, the keeper of a law written in light and gravity. The system was quiet once more, but it was no longer a dead, forgotten place. It was a sanctuary. It was the anchorage of a higher authority. Ilara's voice, now calm and filled with wonder, came over the comm. "Commander, the Saint is broadcasting again. A wide-open channel. It's a ledger entry for everyone to see." On the main view screen, a simple, elegant script of light appeared superimposed over the image of the now pacified system. It listed the gilded scrappers by name, their transgression, the judgment rendered, and the restitution paid in the form of their disabled systems. It was a public record, a precedent set for all to witness. This was the Saint's power, not the power to kill, but the power to hold accountable, to record every action and ensure that every debt was honored. The scrappers had not just been defeated, they had been entered into a cosmic book of accounts. Their shame and their sentence were now a permanent part of the stellar record in this sector, a warning to all who might follow their path. The Saint was not just a judge. It was a historian, a scribe of justice. A reckoning cannot be outrun, only delayed. The immediate crisis was over, but Rostova knew this was just the beginning. The Synod would be back, their logic rearmed with this new data. The Protectorate High Command would descend with 1,000 questions and 100 new orders, and the myriad factions of the galaxy pirates and corporations and empires had now been put on notice. There was a new power in the void, an ancient one that did not play the game of territory or resources. It played the game of principles, and its rules were absolute. Her duty was no longer simply to guard a silent relic. It was to learn from it, to understand the profound responsibility of wielding a power that did not conquer but corrected. She looked at the serene winged form of the saint, a sentinel of cosmic law. It had placed its trust in her judgment. She had to prove herself worthy of that trust, not just for today, but for all the tomorrows that would follow in the wake of this extraordinary awakening. The age of imbalance was over. The age of the ledger had begun. The weight of true justice is the weight of worlds. A new alert suddenly flashed on Jax's console, pulling Rostova from her reverie. "Commander, I'm detecting a ghost signal. It's old, very old. It's piggybacking on the Saint's ledger broadcast." His fingers flew across the panel, trying to isolate the source. "It's not Protectorate. It's not Synod. It's a signature I've only seen in history files. From the Schism Wars." A cold dread, colder than the vacuum outside, began to creep up Rostova's spine. The awakening had not gone unnoticed. It had stirred more than just pirates and machines. It had reached across centuries and touched the ears of other relics, other factions from that dark and terrible age. The signal was faint, a whisper on the edge of sensor range, but its message was clear. It was a single, repeating ideogram, a symbol of a forgotten human empire that had believed in law, but a different kind of law. A law of iron and absolute control. The symbol was a clenched fist holding a broken scale. It was the mark of the legate. They were the antithesis of the saint enforcers, who believed justice was a weapon to be wielded by the strong, not a principle to be discovered by the worthy. They believed in collars, not ledgers. A law without mercy is merely tyranny. Magister's voice cut in its synthesized tone, now carrying an urgent, sharp edge. "Warning. The incoming signal corresponds to a dormant iron hegemony battlenet. Historical analysis indicates their doctrine is preemptive compliance enforcement. They will perceive the saint not as an arbiter, but as a rival legal framework to be subjugated or destroyed." The game had changed once again. Her next opponent would not be driven by greed or a misguided fear of chaos. They would be driven by a righteous, unbending, and utterly ruthless ideology. They were the old law, the law of the fist. Rostova looked from the symbol of the clenched fist on her screen to the serene open wings of the saint. Two ancient human philosophies, two clashing definitions of justice were now set on a collision course. The saint had awoken to balance the scales, but a force was coming that sought to shatter them forever. Her tenure as its steward was about to face its first true test, not against simple criminals, but against crusaders who believed they were the only true servants of order. Her ship was repaired, her crew was resolute, but a storm was gathering at the edge of the system. The heart must be stronger than the steel it commands. She had to prepare. She had to understand the saint's full capabilities, its language of law and consequence. Her flotilla was a shield, but the saint was the principle they defended, and a principle is only as strong as the one who upholds it. "Ilara," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I need you to open a deeper dialogue with the saint. We need to know everything it is willing to teach us. We need to learn its history. We need to learn its laws." The engineer's determined face appeared on the screen, nodding. "Already on it, Commander. The schoolhouse is open." Jax plotted the vector of the incoming ghost signal, his face a grim mask. Estimated arrival of the Vanguard element, 72 hours. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for a clash of philosophies that had slept for 1,000 years. Rostova took a slow breath, centering herself. The fear was a cold knot in her gut, but her duty was a fire in her heart. The saint had chosen her. The law had chosen her, and she would not be found wanting when the bill came due. A new presence made itself known not on the sensors but in the heart of their communications. The Argent Saint itself was issuing a query directed at her, a silent question that bloomed in her mind, a choice presented in the cold, clear language of its core programming. It showed her 2 paths. One was retreat to preserve the saint for a future battle to flee before the Iron Hegemony arrived. The other was to stand their ground, to make this system the stage for the ultimate legal argument, the argument between the open hand and the clenched fist. A verdict must be rendered in the light. Rostova knew there was no real choice. To run would be to concede that justice could be chased into hiding. It would be an imbalance, a debt owed to fear. She stood before the view screen, a lone human figure against the backdrop of a cosmic miracle, and made her decision. Her whispered reply was for the saint alone, a promise between a commander and her solemn charge. We hold the line. We show them what true justice looks like. The light from the saint's sigil pulsed once, a slow, steady beat of agreement. The ledger was open. A new entry was waiting to be written. The court was in session. The choice was made, a silent vow in the void. 72 hours. Rostova felt the seconds begin to tick away, each one a grain of sand in the hourglass of this fragile peace. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the crew moved with a new somber purpose. The initial adrenaline of the victory over the scrappers had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of the coming storm. The ghost signal from the Iron Hegemony was no longer a whisper. It was a steady incoming pulse, a drumbeat marking the approach of an ancient, unforgiving doctrine. The clenched fist was coming for the open hand. Their law was a hammer and every problem a nail. Elara, what have you learned? Rostova's voice cut through the low thrum of the bridge. The chief engineer's face materialized on a secondary screen, her brow furrowed in concentration, the glow of data reflecting in her eyes. Commander, the Saint is a library of law. It's feeding me terabytes of data case histories from before the Protectorate was even a concept. It calls its creators the first arbiters. Their entire civilization was built around this principle of balanced restitution. She paused, her expression turning grave. It also has extensive files on the legates. They were a splinter faction, a militant judiciary who believed the arbiter philosophy was too passive. They believed justice shouldn't just balance the scales, it should break the unworthy. Jack swiveled his chair away from the tactical plot. So they're not just conquerors, they're crusaders. His assessment hung in the air, heavy and sharp. A conqueror, you could bargain with; a pirate, you could pay. But a crusader, they saw compromise as heresy. You could not negotiate with an idea, especially one that saw your very existence as a legal failing. Magister's cool, synthesized voice joined the conversation, its logical framework attempting to quantify the unthinkable. The hegemony's doctrine of preemptive compliance is functionally indistinguishable from unprovoked aggression. They will likely classify our defense of the Saint as obstruction of justice and sentence us to summary decommissioning. A sentence written before the trial had even begun. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the Argent Saint, its serene winged form a stark contrast to the violence it was attracting. It had slept in peace for centuries, a silent monument. Her arrival, her enforcement of the law, had been the stone that started this avalanche, The responsibility was hers. They will try to frame us as the aggressors, she mused, thinking aloud. They will broadcast their judgment, their version of the law, and paint us as criminals. They will not fire first with weapons, but with words. She looked at Jax. We need to control the narrative. The Saints' ledger is already broadcasting. We need to add to it. We need to make our own case to the galaxy before they can. A new civilian vignette began to form in the data streams. The crippled scrapper vessel, the grave robber, was broadcasting a message of its own. It was a confession. The captain, Kalen, his voice raw with a fear that had burned away his greed, was detailing their actions, their motivations, and the precise, bloodless judgment that had been rendered against them. He described the Saint not as a weapon, but as a mirror that had shown them the ugliness of their own choices. The message was being picked up by cargo haulers, by distant listening posts, by anyone monitoring the Ophiuchus channel. The first entry in the Saint's new history was being written not by Rostova, but by the very criminal she had prosecuted. The truth once spoken has a power all its own. Ilara's voice suddenly sharpened. Commander, the Saint is showing me something. A defensive capability. It's not a shield, not a weapon. It calls it the aegis of jurisdiction. It can project a field where a single chosen legal principle becomes an immutable law of physics. Inside that field, cause and effect are bound to the letter of the law. The concept was staggering. It wasn't a defense against energy or matter, but against ideology. It was a way to force an opponent to live by their own rules perfectly and instantly. Rostova saw the path forward, a sliver of light in the coming darkness. Can it enforce their law? She asked, her mind racing. Can it hold them to their own standard? Theoretically, Ilara replied, her voice filled with a scientist's awe. But it would require a perfect understanding of their legal code. And it's a massive power draw. It would drain the Saints' reserves, leaving it vulnerable if it fails. It was a gambit then, a single decisive legal maneuver that would either win the day or leave them utterly defenseless. A trial by ordeal where the ordeal was the law itself. They had less than 3 days to study the enemy's Bible and build a cage from its scripture. A cage of logic for a beast of dogma. Aboard the Synod scout vessel Observer 7, the machine mind, designated Verity, processed the ongoing events in the Ophiuchus system. Its initial assessment had been flawed. The artifact was not a chaotic weapon. It was a system of logic, elegant and severe. The surrender and confession of the gilded scrappers, the Protectorate commander's measured responses, the artifact's own precise actions, it was all data for a new conclusion. The entity designated Argent Saint represents a paradigm of non-destructive enforcement, Verity broadcast to the Synod Collective. Its methodologies warrant further study. The impending conflict with the Iron Hegemony is a stress test of two incompatible historical doctrines. Optimal strategy, continued observation. The outcome will redefine our understanding of universal law. The 72 hours passed like a lifetime and a heartbeat. Rostova's crew worked without rest. Ilara and Magister became legal scholars, dissecting every fragment of historical data on the Iron Hegemony, building a profile of their rigid, unforgiving legal code. Jax and his tactical team ran endless simulations, trying to predict the legate's approach, their formations, their methods of enforcing compliance. Rostova herself spent the time in quiet communion with the Saint, learning to feel its rhythms, to understand the deep patient power that flowed beneath its silent silver skin. She was no longer just its commander. She was becoming its advocate. And then they arrived. Exactly on schedule, with a precision that was itself a statement. 5 ships tore open the fabric of space-time and emerged into the system. They were wedges of obsidian and grim iron hulls, etched with geometric patterns that seemed to absorb the very concept of light. They did not glide. They imposed themselves upon the void. Their lead vessel, larger than the others, broadcast its designation, the Hegemony Flagship Indictment. They arranged themselves in a perfect executioner's formation, a semicircle that enclosed the Vigilance and the Saint. There were no hails, no warnings, only a single system-wide broadcast. Their arrival was an accusation. By the authority of the Iron Code in the matter of the rogue arbiter-class entity, Seraph 1, the voice was male, impossibly deep and resonant, laced with the cold certainty of a hanging judge. A charge of unlawful activation and illegal armament has been entered. A charge of harboring a rogue weapon has been entered against the Protectorate vessel Vigilance. It was Legate Corden, and his first act was to declare them guilty. You will surrender the artifact for summary judgment. You will power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded for prosecution. This is not a negotiation. This is the rendering of a verdict. Rostova stood tall on her bridge. This was the moment. Ilara, are we ready? The Aegis is primed, Commander. The engineer's voice was tight but steady. I have their entire legal code mapped. The moment they act on their verdict, the field will engage. Rostova looked at Jax. Tactical. We're ready to dance, Commander, he said, a grim smile on his face. Let's see how they like their own music. Rostova nodded and opened a channel to the indictment. The law is a shield, not just a sword. Legate Corden, this is Commander Eva Rostova of the Commonwealth Protectorate, she said, her voice calm and clear. You have entered our sovereign territory and issued threats against a protected heritage site. By our laws, you are the aggressors. You speak of verdicts, but you have held no trial. You are in violation of the most basic principles of civilized justice. She was not just defending herself. She was challenging the very foundations of his authority. She was drawing the philosophical battle lines. Corden's laughter was a low, chilling sound, like grinding stone. Your civilized principles are the reason the galaxy is rife with chaos, Commander. The law is not a debate. It is an instrument of order. Your refusal to comply is your confession. From the bow of the indictment, a beam of energy shot forth, not a weapon of destruction, but something far more insidious. It was a shimmering golden lance of focused data. It's a compliance beam, Jack shouted. They're not trying to destroy us, they're trying to seize control of our systems, a digital collar. A debt of tyranny is paid in the currency of freedom. Now, Ilara, Rostova commanded. Engage the Aegis. The Argent Saint pulsed with an inner light, and a vast, barely visible sphere of influence expanded outwards, encompassing the entire confrontation. The golden lance of the compliance beam struck the edge of the field, and its effect was instantly, impossibly altered. The beam was bound by a new rule, a rule taken directly from the hegemony's own Iron Code. Any instrument of control may only be wielded by a party with proven legal standing. The compliance beam, now governed by the hegemony's own law, found them wanting. They had no proven standing, only a self-declared verdict. The lance of golden energy fractured, turned back on itself, and slammed into the indictment. The Legate flagship didn't explode. Instead, its own systems seized. Lights flickered across its iron hull. Its weapon ports locked open. Its engines sputtered and died. The Legate had attempted to place a collar on the Vigilance, and the Aegis of jurisdiction had forced that collar around his own neck. Their own rules had become their prison bars. A collective gasp went through the bridge of the Vigilance. They had witnessed a miracle of legal engineering. The other 4 hegemony ships, seeing their flagship disabled by its own weapon, hesitated. Their rigid doctrine had no contingency for a foe that weaponized their own certainty against them. Legate Corden's voice, now laced with fury, boomed across the calm. "What have you done, heretic? What sorcery is this?" "This is not sorcery, Legate," Rostova replied, her voice ringing with the authority she had earned. "This is the law, your law. The Aegis field you are now inside makes the Iron Code the absolute governing principle of this space. Every action you take will be judged by your own standards instantly and perfectly. You wanted to be the judge, then you must also be subject to judgment." She had turned his own weapon, his own ideology against him. She had mirrored not his energy, but his soul. A mirror shows not what you want to see, but what you are. The remaining legate ships attempted to adapt. 2 of them fired kinetic slugs not at the Vigilance but at the Argent Saint, hoping to destroy the source of the Aegis. But as the projectiles entered the field, another law from the Iron Code was invoked. The destruction of evidence or a court artifact during a legal proceeding is an act of supreme contempt punishable by immediate incapacitation. The slugs slowed to a crawl, then were encased in cages of hard light frozen in place. Simultaneously, the 2 ships that had fired them went completely dead in the water, their power systems instantly and comprehensively shut down. They floated inert monuments to their own failed tactic. Now only 2 enemy vessels remained functional. They held their fire, their machine-perfect formations broken, their certainty shattered. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Iron Hegemony was faced with a legal argument. It could not win through force. They were trapped not by shields or weapons, but by the very system of belief that gave them purpose. Any aggressive act would be a violation of their own code and would result in their own disablement. To do nothing was to concede defeat. It was a perfect legal checkmate. Their certainty had become their undoing. Legate Corden was silent for a long moment. The rage in his voice was replaced by a chilling, venomous calm. "You are clever, Commander. You have turned our strength into a weakness. But the Iron Code has contingencies for such paradoxes." A new energy signature began to build from the 2 remaining legate ships. It was something different, something darker. Magister's voice was sharp with alarm. "Warning! They are deploying a writ of annulment. It is not a weapon in the conventional sense. It is a targeted energy field designed to erase sentient programming. A soul killer for machines. They are not targeting the Aegis. They are targeting the Saint's consciousness directly. This was their final desperate gambit. If they could not defeat the court, they would execute the judge. They were escalating beyond a battle of ships, beyond a battle of laws. This was an attempt to murder a god. The cost of this attack was immense. It would drain their own ships of all power, a final spiteful act. But their doctrine allowed for it, a terrible loophole. A rogue legal framework that cannot be subjugated must be unmade. The ultimate tyranny is the erasure of the other. "Ilara, can the Aegis stop it?" Rostova demanded, her heart pounding. The engineer's face was pale. "No, the writ doesn't violate their code. It's the final expression of it. It's legal under their own twisted system. The Aegis will let it pass." A cold dread settled over the bridge. They had built the perfect cage only for the beast to reveal. It had a key forged from its own insane logic. The 2 legate ships unleashed writhing tendrils of black and red energy that slithered through the Aegis field, ignoring everything else, and converged on the serene form of the Argent Saint. This was a cost Rostova had not anticipated. In her focus on the law, she had forgotten the ruthlessness of those who would twist it to their own ends. She felt a surge of protective fury, a feeling that went beyond duty. The Saint was not just an artifact. It was her charge, her partner. It had trusted her. She would not let it die. A wild, desperate idea formed in her mind, a legal gambit of her own that was as audacious as it was insane. A leap of faith is sometimes the only path forward. Magister, she snapped. Open a direct channel to the Saint's core consciousness. Full sensory immersion. I'm going in. Commander, that is inadvisable, the AI protested. The neural feedback could be catastrophic. Do it, she ordered. The world dissolved around her. The bridge, the stars, the ships all vanished, replaced by an infinite space of quiet, orderly light. She was inside the mind of the Saint, a realm of pure concept, and before her a consciousness coalesced, a being of light and law, ancient and wise. She could feel its surprise, but also its acceptance. She made her plea not in words, but in pure intent. You are being judged by a foreign law. You cannot be both defendant and judge. Recuse yourself. Grant me your authority. Let me be the court. It was the ultimate transfer of power. She was asking the Saint to place its very existence in her mortal hands. For a heart-stopping moment, the being of light simply observed her. Then it bowed. It ceded its power, its jurisdiction, its very identity as the ultimate arbiter to her. The aegis of jurisdiction, which had been keyed to the Saint, now recognized a new supreme authority, Commander Ava Rostova. The burden of judgment is the heaviest mantle. Back on the bridge, Jax and the crew watched in horror as the tendrils of the writ of annulment began to touch the Saint's hull. But just before they could burrow in, they stopped. The Aegis field, now under Rostova's command, had a new supreme law, protectorate law. And under protectorate law, the act of desentencing a recognized sentient being was the highest possible crime. It was murder. The writ of annulment, now judged by a law that valued life and consciousness above rigid doctrine, was reclassified. It was no longer a legal instrument. It was a weapon of illegal, premeditated violence, and the penalty for its use was absolute. The tendrils of dark energy, their legal justification gone, reversed their flow. They did not just return to the two-legged ships. They carried with them the full weight of the verdict they had just earned. The two ships did not explode. They were unmade. Their hulls dissolved into constituent atoms. Their crews were not killed, but shunted into emergency stasis pods and ejected an instant before the end. The ships themselves, every plate, every wire, every bolt ceased to be. It was a perfect, terrifying, and just execution. Not of a crew, but of the weapons they had used, and the ideology that had built them. It was the law of balance delivered with the finality of a hegemony verdict. A law that does not value life is no law at all. In the aftermath, a profound silence descended upon the system. The four remaining hegemony ships floated inert, their crews alive, but their power to wage war gone. The indictment was a prisoner of its own failed logic. The other three were monuments to their contempt of court. The Argent Saint was safe, its silver hull gleaming. The cost had been high. The steadfast one of Rostova's cutters had been caught in the backlash of the writ's reversal. Its engines were fried beyond repair, its life support failing. Another cutter, the Resolve, was venting plasma from a dozen hull breaches. The victory was absolute, but it had left her flotilla scarred and broken. Rostova collapsed back into her command chair, the link to the Saint severed. The psychic backlash washed over her, a torrent of ancient memories and the cold, vast weight of cosmic law. It left an echo in her mind, a faint, permanent hum that she knew would never leave her. It was another price paid, a scar on her soul to match the scars on her ships. But they had held the line. They had won. She was no longer just Commander Rostova. She was the first adjudicator, the human hand that guided the saint's judgment. The Synod observers, who had watched the entire exchange from a safe distance, approached now not with threats, but with a single humble request, broadcast on an open channel. We request permission to study your precedent. We wish to learn. The Protectorate Relief Fleet arrived hours later to a scene they could not comprehend. A decorated commander, her small flotilla, in ruins, holding a fleet of legendary boogeymen in a perfect state of legal captivity. The balance had been restored. A new precedent had been locked into the history of the galaxy. Stewardship of these ancient powers was not about command, but about understanding. Not about force, but about wisdom. Rostova stood on her bridge looking out at the great silent saint. It had awoken seeking a judge and found a partner. The galaxy was not ready for the saint's pure, cold logic, but perhaps it could learn from a human who had learned to speak its language. The path forward would be long and difficult, filled with those who would seek to control, to destroy, or to worship what they did not understand. But that was a trial for another day. For now, the court was adjourned. The saint's sigil, the scale, and the compass rose, pulsed with a soft, steady internal light, its arrays cooling from the immense expenditure of power. On a public channel visible to any ship that passed through this system for the next 1,000 years, a new ledger entry blinked into existence. The matter of the iron hegemony versus the principle of balance. Verdict rendered. Justice is not a weapon to be wielded, nor a shield to be hidden behind. It is a mirror vast and clear in which all beings must eventually see their own true face. We do not make the law. We are measured by it. To stand in defiance of balance is to argue with gravity itself. The fall may be long, but the end is never in doubt. For in the grand ledger of the cosmos, every debt is recorded, and every account is eventually settled. The scales are eternal, and they always find their level.